Hey everyone, welcome back to Lingoni English. My name is Emily, and in this video, we are going to continue talking about job interviews. In this section, we're talking about weaknesses. So let's get started. Now, if you haven't seen the first one we did about job interviews, talking about strengths, you can find that video right here. Okay, so let's talk about weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. It's just part of being human, and it's important that you know what yours are so that in a job interview, when you're asked, what are your weaknesses, you have something to say. There's nothing worse than someone saying at a job interview, well, I guess my only weakness is, I guess I'm just too dedicated, or, well, I guess I care too much. Please don't say that. That is so overused and so typical. I'm a perfectionist. No, don't say those. Every single person straight out of college goes to a job interview and says, I care too much. I try too hard. No. Think of other weaknesses. Those are not actually relevant weaknesses. You do have weaknesses. Everybody does. I do. You do. The person interviewing you has weaknesses, but you just need to be able to tell what those are and how you've addressed them and learned from them in the past, and show that you're aware that you're not perfect, but that you're constantly working on being better. Here's an example of the structure you can use to answer the question, what are your weaknesses? I used to have trouble with weakness. I've addressed this by action. I realized I was improving because of impact. Okay, here's an example. I have pretty limited skills in computer programming. I've tried and it seems to not come naturally to me. Therefore, I've signed up for some online courses as well as some webinars and evening classes to teach me how to better do these things. I actually realized I was improving last week when I finally set up my own iOS app. I was shocked. I couldn't believe I've learned so much. So again, I'm addressing the weakness, I'm saying what I've done to improve it, and then a little bit of proof that I have improved. Okay, so here are some examples in English of some common weaknesses that maybe you can draw from for your next interview. Being too competitive. If you're too competitive, you might not be able to focus on getting the actual job done. You might just be trying to win, and sometimes that's good, but most of the time that's not so helpful. You're disorganized. Nobody likes working with a disorganized person. So you could say, I'm disorganized, but I have systems in place to try and keep my time organized, my desk organized, my schedule organized, whatever. The next one, extreme introversion or extreme extroversion. So an introvert is a little more quiet. They like to be with themselves, and working with other people makes them a little bit stressed. An extrovert is the opposite, and both are definitely weaknesses in the job world depending on what kind of job you have. So if you're one of the two, that might be a weakness that you should bring up during the interview. Insecurity. So if you're insecure, then maybe you have lots of good ideas and plans and things to contribute to your group or your team, but maybe you're too afraid to say them out loud. And that's holding your team back, and it's holding yourself back from possible promotions or even better jobs or whatever. So if you're insecure, there are things you can do to work on it, but that's also one weakness that you could bring up. This one kind of goes back to the example I just gave, but if you have a limited skill or ability to do something. So like I said, I was limited in computer skills. So then I gave my example of what I did to improve it, blah, blah, blah. If you're limited in a skill, don't worry, it's not a personality problem. It just means you need to practice more. And there are definitely steps you could take to improve in whatever skill that might be, whether it's computer stuff or time management or even public speaking. That's a very common one. The next one is one that many of us suffer from, including myself, procrastination. So if you procrastinate, that means you put things off until a later date. And some people work very well with this. I think I work pretty well with my procrastination problems, but It's definitely something many of us suffer from. And yeah, you could definitely come up with some ways that you could improve this and show your employer that although you might procrastinate from time to time, you do have systems in place to help you not do it so much. Or maybe you are risk averse. So if you're risk averse, that means you are afraid to take risks. And lots of us are risk averse in some way, shape, or form. But, it is good to be able to take a moderate amount of risks. So if you're risk averse, maybe work on trying to take a couple more risks than you would naturally feel. The next one is self-critical. So if you're constantly putting yourself down, I'm not good enough, I did a bad job, I didn't do that well. Number one, nobody wants to hear that. But number two, you really need to be able to be confident in your work and your skills and your ability to do your job. The next one is maybe you are too sensitive or overly emotional. Now, very sensitive people or very emotional people are quite difficult to work with. It feels like you have to beat around the bush or tiptoe around this person instead of being able to tell them, hey, you did this wrong, or hey, what's that? I don't like that idea. If you're overly sensitive, you should definitely work on that. Definitely find some steps to figure out how to not take everything so personally. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to work and we just want to do a good job. So, okay, and circling back to one I mentioned earlier, uncomfortable with public speaking. Now, this is one that's totally fixable. It's just one of those things you have to practice over and over again, but tons and tons and tons of people suffer from the fear of public speaking. So if that's one of your fears, that's all right if you need to say that when they ask what your weaknesses are. But definitely put yourself out there, and just the more you do it, the easier it is. And the last one, uncomfortable with delegating tasks. Now, it depends on what your position is at work, but for example, I'm a manager, and that would be very difficult for me to manage people without being able to tell them what to do. So if you're uncomfortable delegating tasks, there is a nice way to tell people what to do, and there's a mean way. And I think that finding the nice way will make it much more comfortable for you to be able to do this really important work skill. Also, in case you don't know this word already, delegating just means assigning. Okay, so that's it for the weaknesses. Like I said in the first video about strengths, make sure you think about like 3 to 5 weaknesses, some examples of how it's affected you, how you've overcome some of them, how you're already or maybe like still working on some of them. So yeah, that's it for strengths and weaknesses. Thank you so much for watching Lingoni English. And if you're doing a job interview soon, best of luck. Let us know in the comments if you get it. We'll see you next time.